Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's a special crossover episode with Locked On Knicks, checking in on Kat in New York, also Donte and Julius in Minnesota. Cover a lot of topics today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start your season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves are finally back in action once again, taking on the New York Knicks tonight. And that means today is a special crossover episode with Locked On Wolves, Locked On Knicks. I talked to Gavin and Alex from Locked On Knicks about a whole host of topics. We started by talking about Donte and Julius in Minnesota. A lot of questions and a lot of answers from me there. We talked about their, we'll call them uneven starts in Minnesota, but also some of the positives, some of the stuff they did with the Knicks last year, or I guess over the last several years in the case of Randle. And then we've turned the tables, talk a lot of Kat in New York, talk about, what surprised the Knicks guys about how Kat's played for the Knicks so far. And we also talked a little bit about the matchup tonight. So a lot to get to there. A really quick thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. Of course, you can find this show anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube. You can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, which you can find on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a quick ask to please subscribe to Locked On Wolves newsletter over at lockedondaily.com. It's your one stop for all things Wolves. Monday through Friday, we'll send you an email with whatever you need to know based on this podcast, some national news, the whole thing. It's a really great newsletter to subscribe to, and it'll get you all you need to know about the Wolves each and every day during the week. Again, lockedondaily.com. All right, without further ado, let's get right into my conversation. Myself, Gavin, and Alex from Locked On Knicks. It's coming up right now.
It's Knicks versus Wolves tonight, but today we're all going to be friends. We're all just going to chit-chat, talk about this matchup. Maybe there's some animosity on both sides, depending on who you talk to. Everybody seems to be giving all the right answers in the media so far, but obviously these two teams very, very intertwined this year. Karl-Anthony Towns, after spending his whole career with the Timberwolves, now a New York Knick, and Donte DiVincenzo, after one spectacular year with the Knicks, and Julius Randle, after a number of spectacular years with the Knicks, now both on the Minnesota Timberwolves. We've already done intros in our intros and everything, so let's not go through all the how you doings and whatever, and just get right into it here, Ben, because there's so much to talk about.
Yep.
I know, based off checking the fan pulse of Timberwolves fans, it seems a little dicey over there in terms of the reception for Donte DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. What have things been like so far for them this year? How are they adjusting to Minnesota? I mean, just in general, what have things been like so far halfway across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, Julius, we could start here, they're already starting a little bit behind the eight ball because Karl-Anthony Towns was in Minnesota for 9 seasons, I think it was. It's tough. I mean, I remember, this isn't apples to apples at all, but I thought of this the other day when I was kind of thinking through what is the Towns, obviously the Towns reception is going to be good. Julius Randle, and we'll get to this, has certainly received some I don't know. He's probably the one that even though he's playing better than DiVincenzo, Randle's the one that's drawn the ire of fans a little bit more often. And I liken it a little bit, and Timberwolves fans will get this, but 8 years ago, when Tibbs was the coach of the Wolves and he signed Jeff Teague, which is, I realize, a throwback, but a 3-year, he said recently on his podcast, he took an extra $10 million to come to Minnesota because he wanted to come to Minnesota. And he got booed by fans at Target Center with regularity early on because he was replacing Ricky Rubio, who's a fan favorite, who'd been here for 8 years, who'd just been traded. And there was this weird, Teague and the fans never quite vibed. A little bit the same with Julius Randle so far. Now we're only 25 games in. We're only, we're only about a little more than a third of the way or almost a third of the way through the season. So a lot can change, but I think it's the Karl-Anthony Towns shoes, literally and figuratively, are huge to fill in Minnesota for a guy that was with the Wolves for so long through the Jimmy Butler era, the dark times before that, dark times after that, through the Andrew Wiggins trade. They were supposed to be the two, and then it was Zach LaVine, and he was traded. And then into, through he was drafted right before Flip Saunders died. Like, there's so much that happened when Cat was in Minnesota. And, Julius Randle's in an unenviable position. Like, how do you fill those shoes in terms of production? How do you bond with a fan base? And, fans know he could only be here 1 year, maybe not even. I'd be a little surprised if they traded him at the deadline, but it's certainly possible. It may just be a one and done. And so it's inherently a tough thing to live up to. And Julius's production overall has been pretty good on the court. There's some things, he's doing as good as he has his entire career. He's drawing fouls at a really high rate. He's getting to the line a bunch higher than Cat ever did. He's been a solid second scorer for the Wolves. But defensively, he's left some, something to be desired. And also, like, effort wise at times, and I'm sure you guys saw this, and it's partly is just the way he carries himself. I'm not saying he's not trying, but sometimes, after seeing Cat, you guys know this now with Cat, the emotion's always on his sleeve. Julius is a little bit different. And I think that, that's more of an intangible type thing, but that to me is what's kind of gotten under fans' skins a little bit early, is that he's just different in that regard than Karl-Anthony Towns.
I think Julius would benefit so much from just hiring a body language expert and be like, hey man, I know you're not feeling this way, but when you just kind of shrug your shoulders when someone blows by you and you're supposed to rotate and you didn't, it kind of looks bad to everyone. And just a Wolves PR person could tell him that, a Knicks PR person could tell him that, and I feel like that would save him a lot of hassle. But yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you guys probably saw the clip, and maybe not, but it was whatever game that they won on a last second tip in. It was maybe 2 weeks ago. It was like right when they were starting to turn the corner. It was like offensive rebound, put back, or no, it was they secured a defensive rebound. I don't remember exactly, but Randle just kind of stood there, like called for the ball, like kind of. So, there's 10 seconds left of the game. Everyone's scrambling, and then they win the game. Guys are hugging, they're excited, and he just kind of walks off the court. And that was like, people were after a win, like, what's going on with this guy? Like, why is he not more excited? And the actual reporting on it is like, people like him. He's fine. He's just a different guy. And fans just aren't used to that yet.
Yeah, there was a Knicks game a few years ago. Alex, I don't know if you remember who they were playing, but they were playing, I think it was late season. They were playing all the younger guys down the stretch. Julius was struggling. They won either on a buzzer beater or it was like an incredible comeback. Everyone was flipping out, and Julius just walked off the court. And we were like, the next day, we were like, all right, trade this guy. Like, screw this. He doesn't.
That was against the Bulls. I specifically remember that game. It was against the Bulls.
Yeah.
And then there was also, he also last year, and he might still be doing this year, but like last year hired a I don't know what you even call it, like a meditation coach or something. Like, and before games would sit there and you could see him like meditating. And then like after games, a lot of times he did, unless he got called for like the post-game interview or whatever, you could see him kind of just like see himself out sometimes. And that's just sort of the type of dude that he is. But yeah, for sure. He's not, he never really had that moment other than maybe like his worst season in New York, where he was kind of like screaming at the camera in like the opening game against the Celtics and whatever, like that sort of emotion. Like, he never really had that moment that like Cat had recently, where he was like pulling the New York on his jersey and like pointing to it and, gesticulating and everything. That just wasn't really like Julius's flavor.
And the irony of it is that at times, especially in those lean years when everybody was like, Cat's supposed to be the 1A, like I think 2 years, who's the NBA.com GM survey, like if you could start a team with any player, who would it be? And Cat was the guy. Like, people are like, why are we still winning 25 games? And then you have Cat doing Cat stuff, which is great when you're winning like the Knicks are now, like the Wolves did last year, where he's sometimes overly emotional and wears his heart on his sleeve and does the, as you said, the gesticulating and stuff like that. And, being really overly dramatic on and sometimes off the court. And it's great if you're winning, and it's not if you're losing. And so the irony here is that, like, there was that side of it too. And of course, there's always fans. There's always someone somewhere that doesn't like whatever it is. And so there was also that kind of narrative with Cat, like he doesn't read the room. He's not self-aware, which I think is still true to an extent, but he's obviously, as he said recently, grown up. He's a man. He's, in a different place in his life now. I mean, he's just completely different than he was years ago, but Randle's very different than that in terms of like actual production.
Yeah,
he's been fine. I mean, like Anthony Edwards is, he's the engine, obviously, and Randle knew that coming in, and Cat knew it last year. And I think that was one of the more impressive things about Cat's season last year. And we talked about this at the time of the trade, is he understood, hey, I'm 1B now. Like, I'll seed this. I'll play the 4 instead of the 5, which we'll get to him playing the 5 in New York. and like adapted his game. Randle's done it compared to what he did with the Knicks last year. But there's just less shots to go around. There's less opportunities. The offense is still clunky because there is kind of this my turn, your turn thing where, and we saw it early in the Ant and Cat years too, where it's literally like, okay, it's your possession. You can isolate. And then it's Julius's possession. He's backing somebody down 18 feet from the basket. Nobody else is getting the ball in this possession. And everyone just kind of knows it. And that's okay most of the time because Randle's such a good offensive player. It's just not smooth yet, I think is kind of the other thing that gets under people's skin.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I was going to go, because it took really until that OG Anunoby trade for, I think, Julius Randle to, like, it only felt natural if he was the unquestioned number one guy. Like the magic of that 2020 season for the Knicks, where they had essentially no talent around him and they got the 4 seed, it was like, Julius, you are empowered to do whatever you want. And most, even like good NBA players, sub all-star NBA players, if you say, hey, it's your show, they're going to look pretty good. And Julius's ability to do that relatively efficiently that year and shoot 40% from 3 that year was incredible. I was really curious how clunky it was going to look in Minnesota with Anthony Edwards, who at least until this year, like somebody wanted to get downhill, get to the rim. Rudy Gobert, who like maybe a little more flexible than Mitchell Robinson, but also someone who hovers around the basket a lot. And I'm sure it's helped that Anthony Edwards has turned into an elite high volume 3-point shooter. But I'm curious, like just how those three have worked together, because I'm sure you talked about it on your show. Like I saw that clip where he just like chucked the ball at Gobert after Gobert complained about not getting the ball. And I can imagine there's some animosity there, and it's been tough, to your point, to have a fluid offense with those three kind of.
Yeah, the Randle Gobert thing is it's certainly not smooth still. That's actually probably a bigger deal than the Randle Ant thing. Yeah. It's but only because Ant's still getting his, right? Like you alluded to this. He shoots a lot more threes than he used to. He's not shooting at the rim as often. And part of that is, I think, the spacing, because Randle, which was my number one concern after the trade, was obviously teams have to respect Cat from 3. He's shooting a career high this year from 3 for the Knicks. Randle, is a league average type volume 3-point shooter, and teams respect it to an extent. But because of that, I think Ant's been, and I'm sure the Timberwolves coaching staff was like, hey man, just keep launching threes, because the Wolves want to shoot a ton of threes, and Ant's obviously turned into, like you said, an elite 3-point shooter. That's going to create some additional space when you've got Randle and Gobert. Randle would rather get to 12 feet and shoot a tough, mid-range 2 and maybe draw a foul. Gobert is actually the one who's seen his opportunities dwindle. I mean, like his usage rate is like the lowest since his second or third year in the league. His just field goal attempts per game, just a raw number like that, is very low. His scoring is only around 10 points per game. And he's not playing bad. He's just getting less opportunities. So there was that one game where there was that moment that you mentioned where, Gobert had fumbled some passes and then got mad he wasn't getting the ball. He got the intentional 3-second call where he, sauntered out of the lane knowing he was going to get a 3-second call. It was in a close game. It cost the Wolves. They end up losing. It's late in that game when Randle chucks the ball at Gobert, basically trying to prove a point like, hey man, you can't catch the pass anyway. But just last game when the Wolves won, I think it was Sunday night, Randle threw a lob to Gobert, and it wasn't a perfect pass. Gobert had to go up and get it and dunked over somebody. And so we're seeing those moments. Everybody's kind of watching. The body language experts are watching. These guys like dapping each other up after plays, and like they are, like, it feels like things are where they should be. And the team had, the players only meeting and all that. They've now won 6 of 7. So things seem to be trending in the right direction. I mean, Gobert has these moments. A couple of years ago, it was with Kyle Anderson in the last game of the regular season. Randle and Gobert are very unique personalities. And so I think ultimately it's going to be okay. And we've seen signs of that recently, but it's still like an offense that was very middle of the pack last year is worse than that this year, because you take out somebody like Cat and his spacing and his true 3-level scoring, and you bring in somebody who's got a very, it was certainly a very talented scorer in Julius Randle, but a much more, and I would call it a narrower skill set offensively. And it just kind of limits what you can do as a team. And they just haven't found the ability to be, consistently synergistic, if you will. And that's that, the Rudy Randle thing is probably the biggest piece of that.
Well, one guy that if you take one look at the stat sheet, definitely is having a hard time finding his way being synergistic is Donte DiVincenzo so far this year. So let's talk about him in a moment. And then Gavin and I can field some questions about Cat and the overall experience with the Knicks, which honestly, I think we're both getting pretty glowing reviews. He's been pretty great so far, pretty much as advertised. So we'll be back in just a moment to discuss all that.
But first, we want to tell you about our newest friends here at Locked On over at Built. Today's episode is sponsored by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments, just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program, the possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. I love using points for travel, and Built makes it so easy to turn rent into rewards. I'm paying it anyway, so I might as well benefit for it. Why not make it work for me? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. Make sure to use our link so they know we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today.
And today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. And let me tell you guys about Game Time Picks. It's my favorite thing about the Game Time app. It's a relatively new feature, and it makes getting tickets for live events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I used this recently when I went to the Knicks-Mavs game in Dallas when I was visiting some friends. And, not a great game, but really great seats, honestly. The seats were cool, and the deal was even better. So I can't complain there. Game Time did their job. The Knicks just didn't do their job in that particular game. But the other favorite feature of mine with Game Time is all-in pricing, which allows you to see the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So you don't have to do that song and dance where you think you found the best seat in the building and then you click it and it's like, oh, it's going to be like $20 a seat. This is going to be awesome. And then all of a sudden you go to check out and it's like $65 a seat and you don't know what happened. Well, it's all those fees. And luckily Game Time just puts those all out in the open if you hit that toggle, and then you're good to go. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, you can use Game Time as well. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, we're back in to keep talking through the Knicks turned Wolves, and let's talk a little Donte DiVincenzo here, Ben. Things not looking fantastic for him so far this year. I have to admit, I have not watched a lot of Wolves basketball, but I have heard of the tale of Donte not playing super good. 8.3 points, 3.1 rebounds, 3.4 assists so far this year, but it's the shooting splits where things get really ugly. 353 overall field goal percentage, 319 from the 3-point line, and then free throw percentage 75%, which that's fine, but not really taking many of those. So that doesn't really matter. What's really concerning there, if you're watching this, as a Knicks fan, is wow, this dude is only shooting 32% from three this year on 6.4 attempts. He was as money could be for the Knicks last year, and they did a great job of freeing him up for threes and getting him working either with the ball in his hands or off of off-ball screens or whatever to just free him up and create opportunities for him to get easy threes. What has not been working for him so far in Minnesota this year? Is it that the utilization isn't quite there yet, or is he just straight up been building a house with all those bricks?
I mean, it's both. And Alex, you were the one that enlightened me to the stat when we did the crossover pod following the trade, that DiVincenzo last year was third in the NBA in both attempts and makes last year from outside the arc, behind only Luka and Steph. So, obviously this dude's a phenomenal three-point shooter, and is over 40% his last two seasons combined, Golden State and New York. And it's a combination of all those factors. And if you watch the Wolves at all in the preseason, of course, the Wolves did play the Knicks in the preseason. It was like Wolves fans are wondering, does this guy ever miss? Like, he was nearly perfect from outside the arc in preseason, and he played a fair amount because the Wolves were trying to get him acclimated to his new teammates. But as soon as the regular season started, he just has never looked comfortable. He's came off the bench for every game except for two. He started a couple times when Mike Conley was out earlier this year, and he's never ever looked comfortable. And certainly it's a lack of there's just less shots available. He's actually only playing about 4.5 minutes less per game than he did last year with the Knicks, but he's just never one of the top two or even three options when he's on the floor. And he's also been asked to initiate a lot more offense with the Wolves than he did with the Knicks. And you'll notice like all his assists per game, assist rate is at a career high because he's basically playing point guard, and he's not really a point guard. He's a bit of an undersized off guard, and that's just what he does. And he was a good all around scorer last year at the Knicks, but it's just, he's being asked to do things he wasn't asked to do last year, which is come off the bench, shoot a little bit less, pass a little bit more, initiate some offense. And I had hoped that like the Wolves would actually run some plays for him like they used to run for like Malik Beasley, or going back even further, some guys who were really movement shooters. And like you mentioned, getting him free for 3-point shots. And they've never really been able to do that because he hasn't found a rhythm. And they keep, they'll have ATOs where they do that because they're trying to get him out of this funk. It just hasn't really caught on. On the positive side, the Timberwolves' best lineups all include their 3 bench players, which says a lot about the bench players and also a little bit about the lack of cohesiveness in the starting lineup. But Naz Reid, who's last year's 6th man of the year, Donte DiVincenzo, who of course was awesome with the Knicks, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who kind of came onto the national scene with how he locked down Jamal Murray in the playoffs last year. But that's about as good of a 3-man bench unit as you're going to have. And like every combination with starters, like with Ant or with Conley or with Gobert, is positive with those 3 together. So those 3 have played great together and have really built something. But individually, Dante's just never really found a rhythm in Minnesota. But again, we're less than a third of the way through the season, and there's like, he's too good of a player to not. And of course, there were some trade rumors a few weeks ago. They're not trading him. His contract's fantastic, as we've talked about before, after the trade. So I don't think he's getting traded from Minnesota. It's just, he's got to find a way to get into a rhythm.
Yeah, the 2, just going on cleaning the glass right now, the 2 areas that kind of shocked me, he was just much improved at the rim the last 2 years. That was an area that he kind of historically struggled, or at least for a couple of years there. But he was 63% in Golden State. Then he was 58% in New York. Only 44% so far in Minnesota. That is 2nd percentile for guards. That's not good. That's like some of Mikal Bridges' numbers at times this year. In the corner threes, 45% last year, 54% 4 seasons ago, 42% the season in between. This year, just 26%. So I would expect those numbers to bounce back. Last year, he had a 6-game stretch where pretty much everyone was out for the Knicks, and he was on the ball, and he looked really good, really comfortable scoring the basketball. I would expect sooner or later it would click for him, and he'll start playing really well, start making shots. But Ben, I wanted to leave the floor to you belatedly. I'm sorry, we took a lot of time. We're really curious. What do you want to know about the Knicks? What do you want to know about Karl-Anthony Towns' performance so far?
I mean, there's twice as many former Knicks as there are former Wolves, so it makes sense. Kat, like Wolves fans saw, as we established off the top, a lot of Karl-Anthony Towns, and yet he's still, I guess he's no longer quite career high, scoring average, but it's close. He's at a career high rebounding average. He's somehow at a career high 3-point percentage, even at like maintaining basically the same usage he had over the last few years in Minnesota, or at least 3-point rate as he had in Minnesota. What has, I guess, surprised you guys the most about what he's shown in terms of his offensive game, that either you didn't know he did, or from what you saw of him in Minnesota, you feel like he's improved on in his time as a Knick?
I mean, I would say first off, like so we knew that shooting was going to be really good, and it is, and it's been revolutionary for the Knicks in terms of what they can do in their starting lineup now, which is great. But I would say the one thing, and Gavin and I said this a few times, especially in recent shows, the one thing that like did not translate to me right from the rip, from what I'd at least heard, like even just from, I have a family member who's a T-Wolves fan and like just grew up in the KG era, and that was the team he gravitated to, even though he's from my area. Like, and he was like, thank God that dude's off my team now. Like, he's so soft, blah, blah, blah. And the word soft came up like so much. And I just feel like he's been anything but. Like, this guy just wings himself at the rim like a dozen times a game, like goes full tilt, like barrels into people. I mean, sometimes, you would warn me about this, the fouls and stuff, sometimes are a little much, sometimes he gets a little ahead of himself. He like gave Mo Wagner a elbow to the dome the other day, trying to mask it as a basketball move. But, like little things like that sometimes come up. But for the most part, I mean, this guy's like ready to fight every single day. Like, he is like in the trenches, getting rebounds. He's trying to get putbacks all the time. I think that's the main thing that's really stood out to me and been good in the sense of like you said, and you've noticed, with Randle a little bit, where whether it's just bad body language or whatever, he gives listless sometimes, like Randle just looks aimless sometimes. And I never get that off a Cat. Like, for better or worse, like, he is always just at 100% intensity. He's yelling on the court. Sometimes gesticulating at the refs or whatever and getting a little, animated and stuff. But for the most part, like, he's out there. He does stuff. He gets pissed off. He does things that are like kind of swaggy as a result. Like, hits a shot over who's it? Was it Wagner?
No, it was Mo Wagner, where he stared at him and then made the turnaround fadeaway, which might be the most iconic Knicks moment regular season wise in the last 5 years. It was dirty.
Yeah, where Wagner was just all over him, just like beating the crap out of him. And then he didn't get a call. He looks right at the ref and is like, "Do you see this? Like, do you see what's going on here?" And then literally just like with no hesitation, just goes, "All right, whatever." Like, takes one more dribble, and then just turns around and like knocks down a mid-range shot over him. Since he's like, well, I can't back him down since he's fouling me, I'll just hit a jumper from here, I guess. And that's all. To me, Gavin, I think that's been the biggest thing that's stood out, that, we knew the spacing was going to get better, and everything else. But I think all in all, just the swagger factor, and I would say the toughness that he's brought to the Knicks in many respects has actually been something I didn't quite expect, and something that's really shown through this year.
Yeah, just a beast of a rebounder. I think still leading the NBA in rebounds per game, certainly the best defensive rebounder in basketball so far this year. And a lot of contested rebounds because the Knicks are pretty small around him. OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges have both had poor defensive rebounding seasons. And along with Josh Hart, he's pretty much the only person keeping the Knicks alive in that category. And every night you see teams like pretty aggressively crashing, knowing that's a weakness for a lot of those guys, and Cat's fending off 2 or 3 guys. So to me, I think that's the most important area where that toughness manifests. It's just winning contested rebounds. His ability downhill, I knew a little bit about it, but I think it's standing out that there's not a center on the floor, and he just is a rim runner, but even more so off the dribble. Like he's just been a tough driver, like finishing with like really powerful dunks at times. And that's a lot of fun because the Knicks had that with Julius at his best. And I thought it was something they would lose. And Cat's just brought some of that bruising downhill nature, which I didn't really always associate with him. So that's been really cool. And then the one other thing is, like, I heard on a different podcast, I think it was Dane Moore, said like he was a pretty bad passer out of the post. Like with Tibbs, he could really score in the post.
He was sloppy.
Was not good at passing the basket. He's been like, the opportunities have been kind of finite. Like he's not posting up a ton, but when he is doubled, like he's been really calm, really meticulous, seems to always find the right guy. He's just really, really impressed me with his passing so far. But then, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say his turnover rate being like the lowest it's been in like 6 years is surprising to me because the usage rate is so high. Like he's obviously, he's 1B there like he was in Minnesota, I would say. I mean, I guess maybe kind of even with Jalen Brunson in terms of offensive options, but I was surprised at how low his turnover rate compared to his usage rate was.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps that Jalen is so ball dominant, and sometimes he is just touching it just to finish. But to your point, like there is a lot of time on the ball, and he's just made great decisions, which has been surprising, and arguably like one of the biggest and probably most underrated keys. I don't think we've talked about it enough in the Knicks offense being so good. But Ben, we'll give you another opportunity to ask some questions about the Knicks. I kind of want to get into Minnesota's elite defense, best in the NBA over the last month. We'll talk about all that and more next here on Locked On Knicks.
Today's episode of Locked On Knicks and Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Thursday Night Football tonight. When I looked at this yesterday, it was Chargers -3, actually the last couple days. And I said on the show, I thought it should be 2.5. It's down to 2.5. Chargers -2.5 right now. Broncos, I still kind of like Broncos at +2.5, honestly, on the road at Los Angeles with how good the Denver defense has been playing. Obviously fantasy football implications, playoffs this week for a lot of people in fantasy football. So plenty to pay attention to over at FanDuel. Again, you can see everything, live play-by-play and more on the same page that you place your bets. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, Ben, anything else you want to know about the Knicks before we get into matchup specific stuff?
Yeah, real quick. I want to talk briefly about like Cat's playing the 5 for the first time in 3 years, and he played the 5 in Minnesota mostly. Defensively, I mean, he shared the front court with Taj Gibson and Gorgie Jang and other guys who at times basically played the 5, at least offensively. But Cat was supposed to be the anchor of the defense, at least in terms of the front court under Tibbs in Minnesota previously. It never really worked out. He's never been the rim protector that people thought he might be coming out of Kentucky. The block rate this year is back up to where it was, which is still modest for a center, but back to where it was when he was a 5 in Minnesota. But what have you guys seen? The Knicks are pretty middle of the pack in terms of their defense. What has he done defensively, and how could the Knicks maybe, I know there's injuries and stuff as well to other bigs with the Knicks, but what does the defense look like with Cat as the 5?
I would say it started bad, but is getting better. The lack of discipline sometimes does show, and he has, especially earlier in the season, I feel like gotten himself into foul trouble, which they just can't afford right now, because that means like Jericho. Well, okay, now they can slightly more afford it since they have Precious Achiuwa back. But I mean, at the beginning of the season, it was like if Cat made it so that he couldn't play 36, 37 minutes, like, that meant more Jericho Sims minutes, which the stats say he did well. There were some games where he looked better, but like he really crashed back to earth, at least in my opinion, recently. And that became like very untenable to play him any sort of major minutes, if Cat was not able to stay on the floor. So that was one sort of issue. And earlier in the season, I mean, players were shooting like an obscene number. I guess I think it was, Gavin, wasn't it over 80% at one point?
Yeah, it was like 29 at 33 or so. It was the number that was thrown out there. I think there were some people arguing that NBA.com doesn't capture every rim attempt accurately, and some of it doesn't account blocks. So there was some noise there, but it wasn't good, is the point.
Yeah, like it looked like he was either not playing the smartest with the fouls, or was being too tentative and trying not to foul. I think he's starting to find a bit of a balance now. It's helpful that he has 2 really good wing defenders, or actually 3. I mean, I think Josh Hart can throw his name in that hat too at this point. 3 really good wing defenders to kind of help him out. And OG Anunoby at his best has, shown the ability to come in and get, a help block from time to time, as long as Cat can just like be big, get his hands up and make the shot attempt a little difficult, and make a guy adjust in the air. OG can come in there and kind of like just swipe the ball away, and block that shot that way. So it's getting better, but we're literally already to the point where just, earlier this week, we had a mailbag question about it and went, all in on that question. And we'll probably go more all in on it of like, will this work with Mitchell Robinson at the 5 and Cat at the 4? Because it worked with Gobert. Like, can the Knicks just kind of steal the Timberwolves homework a little bit and, make that combination work? Because that might be what they need at some point later on this season, potentially in the playoffs as well, is to go to that sort of lineup. Because I do think, I don't know if I would want to see Cat as the 5 for the entire season manning the defense, just because I'm with you. I don't really think that that's his role, and that's fine because he can carry your whole offense and everything else. But it's been a little underwhelming, but passable so far, and clearly good enough for them to be, like 5 games over 500 at this point in the season, or 6 or whatever they are right now. But, like comfortably over 500 and certainly not floundering or anything.
Right.
Yeah. They started getting a lot more aggressive with him, and like he was pretty much exclusively playing drop, which obviously in Minnesota was always a discussion with him, and he always struggled in that. And to start this year, like he really struggled with that. And just at times, like I think back to the Jazz loss, which was probably the Knicks' worst of the year, like along with the recent Hawks loss, where he just wasn't making contact at the rim. Like he would be jumping and someone would be 2 feet away from him. You're like, how's that even possible? Yeah. Like this is one of the best athletes in the world on offense, at least in terms of his coordination and timing and flexibility. And on defense, it just, like, I know Zach Lowe always talks about that, doesn't translate for whatever reason. But recently, I think letting him blitz the ball, like play up at the level a little bit more, like it's very similar to Julius Randle, where our friend Benji Ritholtz had like an inertia theory for Julius Randle, where like if you get him in motion, you put him on a switch against a star, like he's going to look good, he's going to move his feet, capable of playing defense. Kind of same thing with Cat. Once he gets some forward momentum and is literally moving forwards instead of backwards, it looks much, much better. They've kind of gone back to playing him to drop a little bit more. And like there have been times like I thought that the Hawks game, he didn't have the Hawks game had a great game defensively. It was the game, maybe the Magic game at the start. Like, yeah, it was Mo Wagner just torching him and had 32 points. So it's still been a little hit or miss, but I think what Alex was getting at is like he just makes a lot more contact at the rim now, and like in a good way. Like it's mostly verticality, it's mostly up and down. Knicks over the last 10 games have had the 8th best defense in basketball. A lot of that is Mikal Bridges kind of making a leap, but a lot of that is Cat playing a lot better. The team number 1 over the last 10 games, though, is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it's by a substantial margin. I'm sure. I think you literally just did an episode of this on your show, Ben, but they are allowing 99 points per 100 possessions, which, of course, is an absurd number. I think they led the league last year, and it was something like 106. They're 4 points better than the Thunder even over the last 10 games, like 7 points better than the Rockets. That is just an absurdly high level. What's clicking for Minnesota defensively? And if you were coaching the Knicks coming in this one, how would you recommend they try to attack this suddenly super elite defense?
Yeah, I mean, it looks a lot like it did last year, honestly. And it sounds like just a really easy answer, but early this season, the Wolves were playing like they were too cool for school. Like, we got to the conference finals, we can roll the ball out and play, we'll be all right. And it was enough, they lost consecutive games to the Blazers, and they were 10-11, I think, at one point. And the scheme never really changed. It was kind of the same thing. I mean, the biggest difference is in the non-Gobert minutes. They were really struggling. They were, I think when they were 10-11, I pulled this on Cleaning the Glass, and they were like a 7th percentile defense when Gobert was off the floor. And last year they were like, even when Kat and Naz Reid were in the front court together, they were like a 77th percentile defense or something like that, which will play when you're the best defense in the league by far with Rudy on the floor. And the Rudy on the floor minutes aren't quite as good as they were last year, but they're close enough. And now over the last 7, it sounds like just too easy of an answer, but they're legit just playing harder. They're playing harder. They haven't changed the scheme. The low man help's been a lot better. That's kind of something that was really bad early in the season, was Rudy would get caught in no man's land in a drop, and the low man wouldn't rotate. And if he did, then the next rotation was late. They wouldn't X out to the corner, and you'd give up a corner 3 or you'd give up a dunk. And it's defense 101. And Rudy covers a multitude of sins. But if you don't rotate behind him, and a lot of those sins are like what we saw in Utah when you have no perimeter defense, and it's why the Wolves have been so dominant defensively with Rudy, is because they have Jaden McDaniels, who is all defensive team, second team. You have Ant, who can be an all-world defender when he really applies himself on the ball. You have, good team defenders like Mike Conley. You have Nikhil Alexander-Walker. So it's a combination of just being more crisp with the rotations, and they're rebounding better too. One of the issues early in the season was kind of those intermediate rebounds that basically are 50-50 balls, long rebounds. They weren't getting to those, and now they're getting to those. I mean, so it's some flukier things like that. And then it's also just applying themselves, playing harder, crisper rotations. Nothing's changed in terms of their scheme. I wouldn't necessarily say Randle's playing any better defensively. He, to this point, hasn't been as good as Cat was last year. But I would say I would agree 100% with what you said about how those guys defend, that if you put them in space against somebody that's a similar size, even a star player, they're going to defend well, but that's not usually how the Wolves use Randle. And so just because, there's only so many matchups that are perfect for that. But all that to say, I think if I were the Knicks, I think it's just, I know the Knicks play slow, but the Wolves tend to have trouble with teams that play fast, first of all. So, and we've seen, and the Wolves also, the transition defense has been really good. I think it's first in the league as well in transition over the past few weeks, but that's where they've had their biggest issues. Teams are running after makes for a while on the Wolves. They just weren't getting back. Even teams that don't run, even teams that typically play at a slow pace. So I would say push the pace when you can, because if the Wolves get into a track meet, then, higher variance games like that are not good for the Wolves. They need to play slower. They need to control the pace. They need to set their defense. So that's one thing I would do if the Knicks are able to. And then I think just try and make Anthony Edwards defend, because that'll wear him out on offense. And I think the Wolves, they've been playing him less on option 1A for the other team. Usually it's Jaden anyway, but sometimes Ant will pick up some of those minutes, but he's been guarding lower usage type guys, I think, to kind of preserve him, because he's played so many minutes already this year. So I think if you can make Ant defend and try and wear him out a little bit, then the Wolves are kind of, they rely on Julius Randle for a lot of offense at that point, because there's nobody else that really creates for themselves. So that's probably how I'd attack the Wolves. I'm curious who you guys think will defend Anthony Edwards, and maybe that's an obvious answer, but Anthony Edwards, but also how you think the Knicks will respond to Karl-Anthony Towns coming back to target center and how Cat will apply himself at target center. Are the Knicks going to rally around Cat, and is this going to be like this emotional, I guess, wall of emotion hitting the Wolves in Minneapolis?
It's actually really funny. I just want to say first, like when you brought up try to run against them, that was like my first thought where I was going to be like, well, if I was the Knicks and I was going to try to attack these guys, I was try to run, because my biggest worry is that the Knicks are going to get just absolutely schooled on the rebounds, like, and just destroyed. Because Randle is a really good secondary rebounder. Gobert is a really great rebounder in his own right. Like, and the Knicks just kind of have Cat and sometimes Hart, but Hart is always at his best when he's out there as like the third rebounder. Like, he put up such great rebound numbers when, like, I mean, he did it in the playoffs too when they had less guys on the floor, but I feel like his best rebounding performances were when he was able to come out there and you already had a Randle and a Mitch out there, and then he could just crash in there and grab rebounds that way rather than having to like big boy up against like some 4-man and, like box him out every single time down the floor and whatever. I think that's like just the better arrangement for Hart. So I hope that they run in transition too. As far as who's going to guard Ant, I would say probably Bridges. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. The Knicks, for better or worse, have been putting him against the best player on the other like the best perimeter player on the other team pretty much the entire year. To mixed results early in the season, sort of like you said, with the Wolves being a little off, like something was just off with Mikal earlier in the season, and he wasn't getting around screens as much. He wasn't like harassing guys as much. Like, it just seemed like he was kind of just going through the motions, and it felt, I don't know, maybe like his brain was still stuck in Brooklyn a little bit. But lately, I think we've been seeing on both ends, he's playing a lot more like the version of himself that we thought that he would be. So, Gavin, I don't know if you have a different thought, but I feel like he's probably the guy that'll draw the Ant assignment and be tasked with that.
I think so. The only like fly in the ointment for that is like the Knicks did sort of throw a wrench in that, where there was like an obvious top wing target. Like, they had a 2-game stretch against the Hornets and the Magic, which is, I think, not coincidentally, maybe the best their defense has looked all year, where they threw OG Anunoby on Brandon Miller and he completely shut him down. And they threw OG Anunoby on Franz Wagner and he really made him work for everything. And OG is the best option. I think it's sort of the inverse of what you were talking about with Ant, where they want to keep some mileage off him. They really want to trust Mikal Bridges' screen navigation, which was terrible by his standards to start this year and has gotten quite a bit better as time has gone along. So I could see it going either way. I have a feeling Mikal probably starts, and if Ant starts cooking, which I could see Ant really cooking Mikal, even though he's been guarding better, the way he's defended overall this season, I could see OG getting that matchup in the second half. And I'm curious to see if it's McDaniels initially against Brunson and Brunson gets going. I wonder if they pivot to Ant, because in that preseason game, Ant was kind of locking him up and he was like clapping in Jalen's face. So I want to see part 2 of that. For my own ego as a fan, I need to see Jalen get some revenge in that matchup. From the Cat emotional standpoint, I do think the rally around him, this feels like a super close team. Like, him and OG like seem to have like a very like specific bond based around mutual weird senses of humor. So I think they will be fired up. I think Josh Hart will probably really want to get this win for Cat. Jalen's a killer every single night. And it just feels like a big game either way. Like, these two teams right after the Anunoby trade a year ago played one of my favorite games of the year. Ironically, Julius Randle was the hero in that one, so maybe he does it for the other side this time around. But in my memory, they've mostly played really good games in the preseason. That was an epic first half before Minnesota kind of ran away with it, if memory serves. I think the energy is going to be good. I think the vibe's going to be good. How do you think Julius and Donte handle it? Because it was obviously very emotional for Donte the first time around, the whole Rick Brunson mess. Julius didn't play. I think it'll be more emotional for him if he comes back to MSG, particularly if Knicks fans are booing him or something. He could have a strong reaction, but I'm curious how those two handle it, particularly with Donte kind of trying to get off the schneid.
Yeah, I mean, both those guys are they're trying so hard. Like, I worry a little bit about Randle, like overdoing it, like trying to prove like, hey, I can fill this guy's shoes. And like, like, I'm not going to tell Wolves fans overall how they should feel about Julius Randle, but like, he's a different player. Like, we can finish where we started. He's a different guy than Karl-Anthony Towns. Yes, he's in his spot of the starting lineup and he's playing his position, but he's a different player. And, if Randle plays his game and stays within himself, it feels like it's probably more likely to be a big Ant game. And I really kind of hope, and I think there's a shot, as much as I think Julius may overdo it, I think this could be a really good opportunity for DiVincenzo to like hit a couple threes that send the Knicks into a timeout and the crowd goes crazy. And like, this is like Donte gets embraced by the Timberwolves crowd, who's just been like waiting to explode, for these moments for Donte, who, as you know, loves playing to the crowd, loves the big moment. And he just hasn't had the ability to do that with the Wolves yet. And I kind of hope that this is the game where he can break through and feel more confident and comfortable as a Timberwolves player and as a important piece of their bench. I think that's very possible. And real quick on Ant, you mentioned him potentially guarding Brunson. I think you're right, where I think McDaniel starts on Brunson, but I also think Ant's going to want that assignment. And if this game's close late, this is one of those where Ant does the superstar thing where he says, no, man, I got him. Like, I know you're all defense second team, but I want to guard Brunson. I think we're going to see some of that because that's just who Ant is. And I mentioned applying himself defensively earlier. If he's not guarding Jalen Brunson, he can get a little distracted off the ball. He's not the best team defender sometimes, but if you say, hey, you're guarding the other team's best player, he looks like he's the best defender in the world. And so I think we could see some of that in this game. I think it's going to be a really, really fun game. And I'm hoping that all those guys, for Cat's sake, he's going to get a great reception. I hope he has a good game. Obviously, I hope the Wolves win. I hope Cat plays great. I hope Donte and Julius play great. I think it would be great if it was good vibes all the way around.
Well, I hope so too. I certainly also hope that Cat has a good reception coming back to Minnesota. I don't think that's in any doubt. I mentioned that I've seen some fans that were like, all aboard getting rid of him, when he got traded and whatever. But certainly a lot of the response I've seen since then has been like, man, I really miss Cat.
Yeah.
I think that's the general sentiment from my perspective of what I've seen of, what Minnesota fans have been saying and stuff.
Yeah,
so
people love Cat. He was here so long and he saw so much, and the grass is always greener, right? So like there's always going to be people that didn't feel like, you mentioned him being soft, that being a narrative and that whole thing. But the vast majority of Timberwolves fans absolutely loved him, and it's gonna be great.
Yeah. So hopefully it's a great game. But I think we've gone on long enough. All that's left now is for them to play the basketball game. So we'll do that tonight. Of course, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell and hit the auto download function and all that for Locked On Knicks and Locked On Wolves. If you're interested in both teams and both perspectives after tonight's game. But till then, this has been Locked On Knicks and Locked On Wolves, and this was a really fun crossover. Ben, thanks for hopping on with us, and let's see how this game goes.
Likewise, let's do it. There you have it. We covered a lot today, and pretty interested to hear the take from people who didn't follow Cat previously, what they know of him now as a Knicks player, and the fact that they basically laugh in the face of the notion that Cat's soft. Obviously, we're only talking about 25 games or so, but I think it's pretty interesting, and to see that Cat's applied himself so well with the Knicks. So. Really fun conversation with those guys. We might get back at it again when Mitchell Robinson comes back. Talk a little, the similarity between Rudy Gobert and Mitchell Robinson, and how Cat could play with Mitch in New York. So potentially some more collaboration with Locked On Knicks here in the future. Of course, Wolves play the Knicks tonight, 8:30 p.m. on TNT, and I will actually be hosting the live postcast tonight with Jack Borman. Fantastic Jack Borman will be live following the game on Locked On Sports Minnesota. So call it 11:15, 11:30ish. Whenever the game gets over, we'll go live right afterward. If you can't watch it live, the audio will be right here at Locked On Wolves overnight, and then I'll be back on Friday with this show. Locked On Wolves will be with you at the postgame pod on Friday. So lots of me on this channel and on Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube over the next 24 hours or so. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can watch on YouTube. You can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also subscribe to the Locked On Wolves newsletter at lockedondaily.com. A reminder that the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.